So, welcome everybody to Kroger and Albertsons by the Numbers. My name is Enrique. I'm an organizer with Essential Workers for Democracy. I'm a former shop steward out of Fred Meyer, Local 3000, and I'm up in Bellingham, Washington. So, thank you for joining us today for today's training. We'll be talking about the truth behind grocery greed, what's really raising grocery prices, and how we can fight back for what's ours in this year's grocery bargain with the big grocers. Today, we'll be presenting research done by union researcher Jon Zerolnick. Jon is a longtime labor union researcher and also the author of a newsletter, the Retail Roundup, covering labor issues in retail and grocery sector. I'm going to pass it off to Caitlin, a fellow organizer here at Essential Workers for Democracy, to share the research. Take it away, Caitlin.
All right, awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Enrique, and thank you all for being here. My name is Caitlin. I'm an organizer with Essential Workers for Democracy, and today I'm going to be presenting some research from union researcher Jon Zerolnick on the state of the grocery industry today, how we should understand corporate profits, and most importantly, what that means for our leverage to win a strong contract this year in our fight for better staffing, better wages, and better stores. And if you're just joining us, please make sure to add your name, your local, where you work in the chat, so we all know where everyone's coming from. But we've got folks here from all over the country who are bargaining contracts this year with these big grocers. So we're going to start with overall profitability in the grocery industry. So according to a federal government report from FTC 2024 from last year, one metric of profit is higher than it's been in 25 years, so higher than an entire generation. As this report said, quote, the profit trend casts doubt on assertions that raising prices at the grocery store are simply moving in lockstep with retailers' own rising costs. So basically what this means is the grocery stores are really grabbing for profit. And it's not because their supply costs are increasing. So there must be something else going on. And it's not just the government that's saying this. There's also even, private companies, private researchers are saying this too. A recent report published in October 2024 from a Wall Street investment analyst from BNP Paribas says that US grocery profitability reached record highs in 2023 and they've continued to skyrocket. So you can see here US food and drink store profit margins are up. They're up by millions of dollars. They're up at about 6%. What is happening? Why is this happening? And what does this mean for us and for our jobs? Well, let's start by looking at some kind of specific companies. Kroger is highly profitable and doing a lot better than it was before the pandemic. So we can see here, and this comes from UFCW researcher John Marshall, that their operating profit is up by 31%. Their free cash flow is up by 65%, and their adjusted income is 44%. And really what we mostly want to look at here is their operating profit, which means like how much money they have left over after all of their costs are taken out of the equation. Their operating profit is up by 31% in just 4 years, which is a significant increase for any company. For Albertsons, that increase is much more dramatic. The increases at Albertsons percentage-wise are really stark, with operating profit more than doubling in 4 years. So operating profit is here in blue. It's been up in just 4 years by 136%, going from $986 million to $2,328 million, which is like $2.3 billion. Market capitalization is the total stock value of a company. So you can see here that Kroger's market capitalization, or their stock price, has doubled since 2019. Wall Street now thinks that Kroger is worth almost $47 billion, which is up significantly from 2022 when valuation was at around $32 billion. So we can see, I know it's a little hard to see at the bottom here, but this is 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024. And you can see just how much that stock price has increased all the way up to 2025 at $46.9 billion. That's how much Wall Street seems to think that Kroger is worth. In a moment, we'll talk about where all of that value and where all of that worth came from. But first, we're going to look at Albertsons stock price as well. So Wall Street doesn't love Albertsons quite as much as they love Kroger, but their stock price is still up about 50% over the course of 5 years. So we can see kind of how their stock has changed over time. Overall, these companies are doing really, really well financially. But are workers sharing in the success? Where is all that money going? That's what we'll be talking about right now. So this, what you see on the screen right now, is the monthly change in the consumer price index for food at home, which is how we measure like the cost of groceries, basically. And this shows the big spike in grocery inflation that we saw over the past few years. The chart starts, I know again it's a little hard to see, but starts in 2019 and goes all the way through December 2024. So grocery prices really shot up around 2022, but average grocery worker wages, which is what we see in orange, has stayed relatively stable since then. There have been some increases, and some of you might notice that these increases around 2022, some of them happened in alignment with the last contract. But otherwise, these wages have remained relatively stable in terms of their change over time, while grocery prices have really, really increased in a very short period of time over just a couple of years. Speaking of grocery prices, which is something that has been a really hot topic in politics, or just, in everyday life, everyone has been really feeling the heat on the changes in grocery prices. One thing we sometimes hear from customers, and I know one thing we heard when we were standing out on the picket line in Denver at King Soopers, is that grocery prices are already too high. And if we get a wage increase, it's going to mean that even higher grocery prices will start affecting consumers, customers. Not to mention that grocery workers themselves, as you know, also have to buy groceries, and are both workers and customers, consumers. What one study found was that wage increases of 10% for workers translated to just 0.36% price increases for consumers. So that's about a third of a percentage. And that is only if the company chooses to offload these increased costs, the increased labor costs, onto the customers, which they actually don't have to do. They can find other ways to kind of eat the costs, or to make up for the cost of the wage increases. We can share the link to this full study if you're interested in reading it. This idea that grocery worker wages are going to increase the price of groceries is a myth. So why are grocery prices going up? Who's benefiting if not the workers? Well, across the entire US economy, CEO pay is out of control. But Kroger and Albertsons is really far outside of the norm using the most recent available numbers. So for all S&P 500 companies, which is like the basket of the most, profitable, successful companies in the US, the typical CEO made about 268 times the median worker. So this over here on the far left is the S&P 500 average ratio. Every year they calculate ratios of the compensation of their CEO to the average compensation, or the compensation of an average worker at that company. So they publish those ratios. The average ratio in 2023 for all S&P 500 companies was 258 times. So the CEO was making in annual compensation, salary, bonuses, stock, about 258 times as much as the average worker, which is shocking enough. But if you look only at food retailers, that number is about the same. It's 283 times. But in 2023, the Albertsons CEO made 475 times the typical worker, while the Kroger CEO made 502 times the typical worker. And it gets worse because these numbers are actually down from recent years. The ratio of CEO compensation to worker compensation reached an all-time high in none other than 2020, which was the year that was probably the hardest to be a grocery worker in recent memory. But rather than adequately compensating the workers, these companies decided to compensate their CEOs. Rather than compensating workers who put their lives, their health and safety on the line during the pandemic to keep the stores open, Kroger and Albertsons were just flooding their CEOs with cash. So for Kroger in 2020, that ratio was up to 909 times. And that trend still continued for them in general. So they really bumped it up in 2020, and the ratio continued to remain high, even though it was slightly less than it was in 2020. So in 2022, they went to 671 times the average compensation. And at Albertsons 2022, their high was 506 times. One way we know that this status quo of 900 something times compensation for the CEOs is not working for workers is the turnover rate in grocery. So one study found last year that the turnover rate in grocery is 60% higher than the national average. So here, the second bar from the right is the turnover rate in the grocery industry, which is 69%. And then over here, the third bar from the left is the turnover rate for the entire economy, basically, which is about 45%. So there's a 60% increase in turnover in grocery. It's one of the highest one of the highest turnover rates in the entire labor force. And that increases at large grocery chains and among cashiers in particular. So this turnover rate changes by grocery role. Meat cutters tend to have a lower turnover rate than others. And I'm sure the meat cutters in the chat can tell me why. And cashiers have a 95% turnover rate, which is, one of the highest turnover rates of any job across the industry. So see again that the turnover rate goes up significantly with larger chains. So bigger stores, Kroger and Albertsons in particular, tend to have very high turnover rates of about 87%, while smaller chains have much lower turnover rates. And that is not a coincidence. So it's important to note that while none of this is good for workers, it's not good for customers either. And in the long term, it's not very good for the employers. As we saw earlier, there's not a lot of evidence for the idea that higher wages for workers mean large price jumps for shoppers. But there is a lot of evidence for the idea that understaffing means a worse experience for shoppers. By failing to invest in workers, the companies are degrading the shopping experience for everyone. So it creates this vicious cycle where we have low labor budgets that then lead to low investment in people that cause operational problems. And those operational problems cause low sales and profits. A very clear example of this is the effect of understaffing and unsafe stores, which are some of the biggest demands of this year's contract campaign, is better staffing and better stores. But rather than investing in adequately staffing the stores or making the stores feel safer, more comfortable for workers and customers alike, these companies have just turned to locking up all of the products, which creates more work for the workers without more pay. Most importantly, creates a really horrible shopping experience for the customers and a horrible work environment for the workers. Survey from Retail Dive in 2024, 27% of shoppers said that they would switch retailers or stop shopping at a store if they came across a locked up product. So they would either go somewhere else or just not buy what they were going to buy if they had to, ask for someone to unlock a case. And if you work in a store that has locked cases like this, I'm sure you know how difficult it is to get to everyone when they're asking for help, especially in the stores that are extremely understaffed. Self-checkout is another way of degrading the shopping experience. And again, it's a really short-sighted one. Self-checkout and understaffing have a very close relationship. Statistics from Capital One show that theft at self-checkout increases by 65% relative to a traditional checker. So these companies are willing to accept that customers are going to steal from them more if they turn to self-checkout. A Harvard study from last year found evidence that workers are more likely to be bullied by customers and treated without respect when a store is understaffed and when the store uses self-checkout. Theft went up by 65% when stores were understaffed. Reports of disrespect and bullying of workers more than doubled in stores that are always understaffed versus those that are not. So they surveyed workers at different stores that were either always understaffed or reported themselves to be always understaffed, and stores that reported themselves to be not always understaffed. And we can see just by looking at this bar chart that the disrespect and bullying that workers faced at the understaffed stores was about twice as much as the ones that were adequately staffed. And of course, amidst all of this, there's a safety crisis facing both workers and shoppers, and it's affecting the retail sector, which includes grocery stores, much more than any other industry. We've known for a while that retail is disproportionately more likely to experience violence and mass shootings. But over the last several years, retail has become a significant target for mass shootings, outpacing other locations and increasing especially around 2020. According to surveys, a majority of retail workers and a majority of shoppers have reported feeling unsafe at stores. And even without survey data, we can see this comes from a source called the Violence Project that maps mass shootings and assaults at grocery store have been up significantly as well. So according to the FBI, almost 4,300 aggravated assaults took place at a supermarket in 2023, which was the most recent data year available. So that's up 7 times from a decade ago, and assaults in grocery store are increasing faster than the trend of assaults overall. So this rate has doubled in just 10 years, meaning that the assaults on grocery workers, the assaults that are happening at grocery stores have outpaced basically the average increase in assault and violent crime across the country. The total number has gone up from 539 reported in 2013 to 4,287 reported in 2023. So in just 10 years, we see this dramatic increase. If you work in a grocery store today, you are more than twice as likely to face assault than you were if you worked there 10 years ago. It seems like every grocery worker has their own experience dealing with unsafe working conditions and violence in their stores. So I'm going to pass it back to Enrique, who's going to share some of the issues that Enrique faced at Fred Meyer throughout the pandemic to talk a little bit more about these safety issues. Enrique, take it away.
I think we all have these horror stories of working in the grocery store. Um, but when it comes to safety, we should be coming home in the same condition or better than the condition that we left for work. I've worked at 3 different Fred Meyer locations and have worked through 3 remodels each time. I've seen a safe remodel done in an affluent neighborhood where construction workers were respectful of space and time. Sections of the store were clearly marked with either cones or plastic being draped down from ceiling to floor. Compared to my last remodel that I was part of, there was debris all over, dust accumulating in the air. It was hazy inside the store. So again, not only for us, but for the customers, there was issues. Sections where construction work was being done with equipment throughout the store floor without any partitions, wires hanging from the ceiling without any warning or sign, whether or not they're hot, incredibly loud and noisy environments. As in the picture here, you see how close we were to the construction. We were right in the middle of it. Everyone thought we should have closed down. Concrete was being polished. I took a decibel reader app, downloaded it to document for my rep, and it got up to over 100 decibels. That's straight up machine factory, and you need to be wearing protection for that. Of course, we can't really be wearing hearing protection at work because we gotta be mindful of everything going on around us. So we had no ear protection, no eye protection, and we didn't have any heavy duty construction boots to prevent any sort of injury from stepping on items like nails and screws that were being just littered all over the back floor. So that's kind of like work safety as far as remodels go. More personal safety, we in the neighborhood at my last location at Fred Meyer, There was all sorts of issues with crime, unfortunately. Drugs were being smoked in the bathroom stalls, presenting bio and chemical hazards. Messes that not only are we dealing with them when we use the restroom or walk by, but we are also being asked to clean. Anybody but a manager has to be cleaning that up. So throughout all of these kind of issues we were dealing with, a cashier was also robbed at gunpoint. I don't believe it was the first time, right? Around the time these shootings were not uncommon to be happening in grocery stores. He was working self-checkout. It was one with six machines all to himself and one of the few closing cashiers. But there was no follow-up from managers. There wasn't any sort of notification, to let people know, hey, this has happened. This XYZ happened. You can do ABC to kind of protect yourself. It's really disappointing to see what happens when the employer just has a laissez-faire kind of attitude with it.
We know that these corporate profits aren't going to workers. Where are they going instead? These companies are making a lot of money, but they're not improving conditions for workers or for consumers very much. So who are they improving conditions for? We talked a little bit already about the CEO compensation, which is one piece of it, but it's not the whole story. There's still billions and billions of dollars in profits that these companies are making that aren't all going just to the CEO. So they're going somewhere else. Where is that? In the most recent year, Albertsons invested about $800 million in lower prices for shoppers, $800 million in higher wages for workers, and then they gave $2.3 billion to wealthy shareholders through dividends and share buybacks. So what is a stock buyback? A stock buyback is basically an alternate way to transfer wealth to stockholders. When a company buys back its stock, it means that there are less shares out there in the world, which means the remaining shares are worth more money. So if dividends are like a direct transfer of wealth to stockholders, buybacks are kind of an indirect transfer of wealth to stockholders. So they spent, more than twice as much or almost three times as much in stock buybacks for their shareholders to enrich their shareholders than they did in investing in figuring out how they could bring lower prices to consumers or higher wages to workers. And this was much more stark for Kroger. So Kroger spent $7.5 billion on stock buybacks, and this was just in the last year alone, compared to less than $1 billion on investment in worker wages and investment in lowering prices. After the Kroger and Albertsons merger was defeated by a powerful coalition of UFCW locals working together with the FTC, these companies were looking for massive paydays for their shareholders, and they really did that. Collectively, they spent about $9 billion in share buybacks for their stockholders, just to make the wealthier even more wealthy. How do we respond to this coordinated power, consolidated power at the top among the grocery giants? We do that through bargaining big. So what does that mean? Contract alignment, coordinated bargaining, or as we sometimes call it at Essential Workers for Democracy, bargaining big. It increases workers' power to win by getting rank and file members across different locals or even across different unions to take action together. So if you can, go ahead and put in the chat, type in the chat right now, how many grocery workers in the United States do you think work for either Kroger or Albertsons today? Not ignore the number that's on the screen because that's not the right answer. Go ahead and put in the chat across the entire United States, across all of the different sectors, the different job classifications. How many people do you think work for either a Kroger or Albertsons owned company? Okay, Amanda says 600,000. Mary says 375,000. Ian says 400,000. Jay says 1 million. I see 500,000 from Emily R. And then I see Adam Isaac 250K, George 300,000, Tanner 625. All very good guesses. And then we have a kind of race for who's going to be the closest to the exact number between Dylan, Eric, and Wendell. So Dylan says 700,000. Eric says 799,999. Very, very smart. And then Wendell says 750K. So those three are about the closest to the correct answer. It's going to be somewhere around 700,000 workers across the country. So about 135,000 of them are bargaining contracts in just the first 6 months of 2025 alone. But there are, a total of about 700,000 workers at these two giant corporations across the entire country. So what would that mean to you guys to be able to bargain with all of those workers? We are going to start by talking a little bit about what that looks like for other unions. And then hopefully we can hear from you guys about what that might look like for you in your job and in your union. So one example comes from the 2023 stand-up strike in the UAW. So in 2023, the UAW combined the power of 150,000 auto workers across three employers, which they call the big three automakers. So that's GM, Ford, and Stellantis. And they combined the power of dozens of local unions across the US in what they called a stand-up strike. The tactic of the stand-up strike was where strikes would be called at specific plants that had a lot of power and leverage in the supply chain. So, for example, a strike at a small parts distributor would be able to shut down or slow production at dozens of factories across a region, which is because of the way that the auto supply chain is set up in the US. So by coordinating their power and targeting strategic choke points, the UAW automakers were able to win wage increases of between 33% and all the way up to 160%. They won cost of living adjustments, they won an end to wage tiers, shorter wage steps, and even a guarantee to reopen closed plants. And this was a huge turnaround from some of the previous contracts that they had bargained in the UAW, particularly ones that followed the 2008 recession. So in the early 2000s, UAW members were basically forced to accept these really concessionary contracts that introduced tiers. They took away their COLA. They took away a lot of their benefits that had made auto jobs good jobs to have. Auto jobs were basically gutted in the early 2000s. And this kind of many concessionary contracts in a row, that pattern continued all the way up until 2023. And some of that had to do with electing new insurgent leadership. So after a corruption scandal rocked the UAW in, I believe this was 2021 to 2022, UAW members were able to elect their international union president for the first time ever through direct elections, through one member, one vote. And they elected their current president, Shawn Fain, who many of us know and admire. And it was not just Shawn Fain at the top who was able to win this strike. It was all 150,000 workers that were able to get involved in their union, to be active, to go out on strike, to feel engaged, to feel empowered, and to win a great contract. But a lot of that did have to do with the ability of members to have ownership and democracy in their own union as well. So that was one of the big changes, in addition to the power of coordinated bargaining, that led to these major wins in the 2023 stand-up strike. Another example comes from the 2024 Unite Here hotel campaign. So by coordinating bargaining for about 40,000 workers across 20 cities, hotel workers won wage increases of up to $10 an hour, Juneteenth as a paid holiday, improvements to healthcare and pension, and more. The coordination across these different hotels allowed for the Unite Here campaign to be very successful, partially because when you build union power, and particularly when you build strike power, and a credible strike threat against the employer saying, if we don't get what we want, we're going to walk. It's powerful to do that at one hotel. It's really powerful to do that at every hotel in the city, so that, if people want to travel to this city, their options are are wiped out, and the people at the top are not going to be making the profits they think they're going to make if we're coordinating across these different cities, across these different areas, and if we're able to leverage a credible strike threat for not just a couple thousand workers, but for tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of workers. Folks, if you could put in the chat, if we had one national grocery contract for all 700,000 workers at one time, bargaining with a huge bargaining table with Kroger and Albertsons and an accompanying national strike threat, what do you think you could accomplish? Just send in the chat really quickly, like a word or two about what you think we could win or what that might feel like, what that might look like for you. Eric says 30% raises. Mary says sustainable jobs for the future. Kathleen says end tiers and sufficient staffing. Mason says no more tiers and getting rid of the no strike clause. And Kathleen also adds plus decent pensions, definitely. Jay says offer full time to all employees. That's a huge one. Another example that is not in the PowerPoint, but I'll talk about really briefly here, is the 2023 UPS Teamsters campaign. So the UPS Teamsters have a national master agreement that covers 340,000 UPS Teamsters all across the country. That includes both the drivers and the people that work inside the warehouses. And they were facing a two-tier system that had been kind of forced onto the members in their last contract. And again, a similar story to the UAW. They were electing new leadership, and they leveraged a national credible strike threat against UPS. And they were able to undo that two-tier system that they called 22-4, which was basically paying workers different wages for the exact same job. They completely eradicated the tiers of the 22-4 in their contract that they won in 2023. I see a lot more things in the chat, so I'm going to read them. Emily R says better health benefits. Kelly Johnson says safety. Ian says eliminate tiers, decent health care, 32-hour work week, more safety. Wendell says massive quality of life improvements, entry wages of $30 an hour, no experience. Adam Isaac says end tiers, more hours, more staffing, meals for workers, getting what's due. George says paid sick days, and Dylan says cost of living adjustment. Absolutely. I think, all of these are things that we can put forward and fight for, that we have a lot more leverage to do when we have a national bargaining table collecting the power of 700,000 workers across the country, and saying we are ready to strike if we don't get safe stores, if we don't get adequate staffing, if we don't get an end to the tiers. And another last point on tiers is, I've seen a lot of different contracts. Many of you have sent me copies of your contracts. There are different tiers in different contracts. Because we bargain separate contracts in different locals or different areas, different parts of the country, these different contracts have completely different forms of tiers. They have different wage steps. They have different times or progressions to full time. They have, different starting pay. And if we want to really take on tiers, one of the most effective ways to do that is to take on the ways that all of these different contracts have different forms of tiers. So we could accomplish a lot if we had a national bargaining table. And we can accomplish a lot this year by coordinating our bargaining across different locals too. We have 700,000 workers nationally, but we have, again, 135,000 or more workers bargaining contracts at Kroger and Albertsons just this year alone. And if we can bring together the power of those workers, we can really show and kind of prove what coordinated bargaining can win. We're going to talk now, moving a little bit towards what we do, what it takes to get there, what it takes to build power on the shop floor, what it takes to get people involved. How do we build solidarity and make sure that we win a strong contract this year? For one, this change really starts on the shop floor. So getting your coworkers involved and united for a good contract with workplace actions like Solidarity Saturdays. So Kylie Ray is a shop steward at King Supers in Westminster, Colorado. She attended our in-person Denver workshop that we just held in March. And at that workshop, we had a special guest speaker who's Tyler Kondo. He's a UPS driver and Teamster member. He's also on the international steering committee of a group called Teamsters for a Democratic Union. Which is a group that we take a lot of inspiration from. He came to that meeting and he shared his experience organizing a red t-shirt day to help get a wrongfully terminated coworker get his job back. Kylie Ray was inspired by the story and just 6 days later organized her first ever red t-shirt Solidarity Saturday at her store. I'm going to pass it to Kylie Ray to talk a little bit about how you did that, what made you want to do it, just kind of talk us through the process. And maybe we'll ask a couple questions to follow up. But yeah, over to you, Kylie Ray, whenever you're ready.
So, like Caitlin was saying, I just got pretty inspired by Tyler's story, and I was taking notes during that meeting. And as soon as the meeting was over, I had gotten with Brian and Don, who are also in this meeting, and we decided that that would be a great way to show our management that they can't divide us, because we've been having a lot of that going around our store where management is trying to divide us and just giving us all a hard time because of our contracts and the strike and such. So we all decided to use what Tyler had shared with us, and as soon as we went back to work the next day, we started passing the message along to our coworkers in our store and just trying to get the word out to as many people as possible to wear red for solidarity on Saturdays, which we are going to continue to do every Saturday. And it worked. Management did notice it right away. But yeah, that's how we got it started and what inspired us to do that. So it's hard with having to work and try to pass the message along. But what we tried to do was Don, Brian, and I all work on opposite sides of the stores. So we just each tackled a certain area of the store. Just walking up to any of our fellow coworkers that we had the chance to see, and we just asked them to please wear red on Saturdays and kind of explain to them, like, hey, we're not allowed to wear our union shirts, and that's them taking power away from us. So we want to do red because it's a sign of solidarity, and management can't tell us that we can't wear red. So we just tried to go along to each department and relay that message to as many people as we could. But that's pretty much how we got the message out, and just tried to tell everybody, like, this will really show them that we all stand together, and this is something that they cannot take away from us, like they tried to do with everything else. We finally had some sort of power that we knew management could not take from us. I know for me, the more people that I seen in red just really opened my eyes. Like, we can really make changes in our store and show management that we have the power, not them, but we do. And then it felt really good too when upper management even noticed, like, hey, why is everybody in red today? And I just told them, like, you can tell me I can't wear my union stuff, but you cannot tell me I can't wear red. And that in itself felt really good to be able to say, like, show them that I have the power, that we all have the power.
What might seem like a small action of just wearing a t-shirt can make a really big difference at a store and can really change the power dynamic between you and management. And yeah, definitely if you are trying to organize your own Solidarity Saturdays or other kind of red t-shirt day, take a lot of photos. I think it helps a lot with boosting morale and making it feel like everyone is part of something together, especially for folks that work different shifts and might not be able to see everyone wearing red. But looking forward to see these Solidarity Saturdays grow at your store, and hopefully see them grow at other stores too. So another way to help get your coworkers involved is to collect contract unity pledge cards. So it's really important to maintain a list of all of your coworkers who are interested in getting more involved and make sure that you have their contact information, like phone numbers and email addresses, so that you can stay in touch outside of work. Being able to meet outside of work to talk about workplace issues in an environment where people are more comfortable and feel more free to talk about, what they're experiencing on the job, is one of the most important things that we can do in union organizing. And it's really difficult to do that if you don't have people's phone numbers or you don't have a way to contact them. I've talked to a lot of folks and a lot of you on this call about starting a group chat, like a WhatsApp chat for your store that doesn't include management, and isn't about scheduling or like covering shifts, but is about organizing and about problems that you guys are facing at work and how to fix them together. And a lot of folks have been like, yeah, that sounds great, but I don't have anyone's phone number. So the Contract Unity pledge cards are a really good way to start. You can easily collect contact information with these cards. You can order a bundle of the cards from EWD for just the cost of shipping, which is about $5, and then bring a stack to work, take photos of them when they're filled out. And then you can send the photos to an EWD organizer so that we can make sure that we contact people about webinars like this in the future. And then you can keep the cards, make a group chat message with the phone numbers of everyone who signed up from your store, and then use the chat to keep members updated about contract bargaining and store issues. Another thing you can do is order a strike ready bundle from EWD, so ew4d.org, to get a shipment of pledge cards, buttons, and a weekly delivery of our Essential Voice Strike Ready edition. So we are doing weekly, like single page front and back newsletters, so kind of extended editions of our Essential Voice quarterly newsletter that we are sending to people every week if you buy a bundle. So you'll get a one-time delivery of the pledge cards, a one-time delivery of the buttons, and then a weekly shipment of the updated every week Essential Voice Strike Ready edition. Our last issue from last week actually features Kylie Ray's story and a little bit more information about how she did it in organizing Solidarity Saturdays. So you can share Essential Voice with your coworkers and keep your store informed about contract bargaining and other organizing updates, sharing exciting stories like Kylie Ray's with your coworkers for the folks that weren't able to make it to this meeting. I know there might be some folks here who are sharing these bundles or have ordered these bundles and are sharing them at work. If you are one of those people, feel free to put in the chat what it's like, how people have responded to the newsletters. So yeah, Adam put in the chat, these were great when Caitlin and I visited some stores in a very quiet UFCW local. Everyone there was glad to see us and thought we were their union reps. Haha. Yeah, so people really appreciate this information. People also appreciate the pledge cards, and it's a good way to stay in touch with people. So before we go to our Q&A portion, I'm going to pass it back to Enrique one more time to share some tips for getting your coworkers involved at your store. So as I mentioned earlier, Enrique was a shop steward at Fred Meyer and did a lot of really great things as a steward to kind of build more solidarity and more union presence and union power on the shop floor. And that's really where the union is built. That's what the union is you and your coworkers on the shop floor. So I'm going to pass it to Enrique to talk a little bit about what Enrique did as a steward to kind of really make that a reality.
Yeah, just a couple quick tips that I found really useful and empowering, not just for myself as a steward and someone kind of getting involved, but also for my coworkers. So the most important one was keeping a copy of the contract and the employee handbook. I used it kind of like a badge, right? Like a protective shield. That way management wouldn't push me around. They can't lie to me about certain rules or how they're applied, or what I'm allowed or deserving of, right? Because of the contract. The employee handbook is also a really important one. It's one thing to know your contract, but the contract doesn't give you all the information as far as what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do at work, right? So these are tools of empowerment, right? Not only so you know what your rights are, but also so when someone comes to you, you have an answer for them. When someone comes to you, yeah, you show them what it looks like to go through a contract and read it. Because these contracts are in some heavy legal terms, so sometimes you might need help. So those are really great in kind of pushing back against the management and the employer to not get bullied. And things like breaks, making sure I'm getting the proper amount of breaks when I'm getting my breaks. Um, yeah. Persistent and consistent union updates. One thing I like to keep in mind is that we're not trying to sell anything to anybody. When we're talking to folks, it's kind of uh, modeling what we want out of the union, what we want to see out of our rep. So that for me, that looked like going to my coworkers, letting them know, hey, it's the beginning of the year, the contract year. We should be getting like a little bump. Make sure your pay stub is looking right. Or hey, there's this survey going around. Make sure to answer it. Just letting people know what's kind of going on, right? Because we always hear about how the rep doesn't get back to us, or we're not hearing anything from the locals. So if you are someone who is privy to that information, pass it around, and build that network, right? And while you're having these conversations, one thing folks have taught me, that being a good rep, being a good union member, a lot of times it has to do with heavy listening, right? We're here to talking with folks, not to folks. We might have the answer. We might know how to help people, but sometimes we have to help them help themselves, right? And so that goes with 80% listening, 20% talking, and really getting to know our coworkers and what motivates them is another big deal, right? We're not going to have them engage and be a part of a militant union, um, if if you're not listening to them make those connections. Find ways to talk to absolutely everyone in the store, off and on the clock. So that kind of couples with the union updates and of course, obviously the listening. But that one was really interesting because I was in ClickList, so I was able to kind of go all over. I know some folks are kind of trapped behind the deli counter or at a check stand. So if you're able to make friends in other departments, or make it a goal to befriend someone in those departments that move around, because whether or not they're pro-union or anti-union, people are gonna want those updates. I know people that are anti-union or don't see it in the best ways. Um, they're affected by the contract too, by negotiations, and you never know. They might start being a little more supportive. And then on top of it, document everything, whether you think it's something positive or something negative, right? You want to protect yourself and protect your coworkers. Document everything and anything you see. Even if you think it's maybe not against contract, document it and come back later when you have time to read the contract. The fact that sometimes management just sees you documenting, taking pictures, is sometimes enough to get people get you off their back. So, yeah, and it's another good way to kind of get other folks involved as well. So if you're trying to build somebody up, a coworker, it's another good way to get involved and be a part of the progress, right?
Okay, so I'm going to answer or try to answer this question from George. So George is out of Indianapolis, local 700. He says, our union contract says that we don't interfere in, quote, ordinary business decisions, but a lot of these ordinary business decisions affect us employees adversely. From sick policy, yes, you can be written up and even suspended for being bona fide sick, is what George says, to staff shortages, to obnoxious micromanaging managers, and we're powerless against these comments. George ends this question by saying, we're powerless against this. But I would challenge that idea and say that if you're bargaining a contract this year, which I believe you are not powerless. You have a lot of power in your ability to organize on the shop floor with your coworkers, and your ability to organize for a strong contract this year. this is, how we start building union power is through connecting rank and file union members across different locals, asking questions like this and talking about these issues, and hopefully sharing this information with our coworkers, starting from, where we are, starting with our departments, starting with our friends at work, people that we have relationships with, the people that we eat lunch with, or, go outside and walk to our cars together with after our shifts. Just talking to them about what issues they're facing and what they think about these problems that you listed, about the sick time, about micromanagement, about staff shortages, and what we can start doing about it. And I think Kylie Ray's story about the Solidarity Saturdays is a really good example of how workers can take power back when we feel powerless. The employer is really trying to make workers feel powerless by doing petty things like trying to come up with, ways to say that workers can't wear their union merch at work, which is mostly against the law, like mostly against the NLRB or the NLRA, which protects workers' ability to participate in what they call concerted activity, which includes, wearing union buttons. But there's lots of ways that the employer can get really petty about enforcing dress code. And say, oh, well, you can't wear a union button because you can't wear any buttons, or you can't, and these things have been challenged and defeated in court, but they still are ways that the employer will try to undermine worker power and union power on the shop floor and make people feel powerless, like George described in his question. But Kylie Ray's story, I think the way she ended it is really a great example of how again, something that might feel small can make a huge difference in how much power people feel like they have at the workplace.
And there are so many ways that us as workers can show our power. Um, I know me as a union steward, I tend to push back on upper management all the time. And something as small as Solidarity Saturdays, find a group of people in your stores that are also very strong about the union and want to boost the store morale and overall just show management how powerful we actually are. That's what I did. Don and Brian are also very passionate about the union and wanting to make a difference. So us three came together and decided, hey, we're going to start this Solidarity Saturday. It might be something small, but they will notice, and there's nothing that they can do about it. Not only the Solidarity Saturdays, but we have also been talking about even starting our own group in the store and including people from every department so that we can all get together and start making changes in our stores and showing management who really has all of the power. Because at the end of the day, even though management wants to take that away from you and all of us, we don't have to allow that. We have the power.
Someone says, and this is an anonymous question, in Colorado Springs, I keep hearing, quote, the union is just waiting until other contracts expire so we can all go and strike together. And I think that's wrong. I don't want to be a part of it. So that's what members are saying, or some members are saying, that they don't want to participate in coordinated bargaining. How do we combat that? Those genuine and real fears and anxieties that people have about something like that.
From what I have witnessed from being at the negotiation table or, at the negotiations or talking to my union rep, it's not necessarily that the union is wanting everybody to strike all at once, but from what I've seen myself personally, it's more the company is not giving in on anything that we're asking for. They're just giving us concessionary offers, and the union, they are just trying to get a better contract.
Right.
So
I also wanted to read a couple of responses that we got in the chat to this question. So Eric says, I don't want to strike either. Nobody really wants to strike. Being on strike is really hard. It's really scary. And if you happened to be on strike in Colorado in February, it was also very cold. No one wants to strike, but we want to be treated fairly and with dignity. And Eric goes on and says, the more leverage we have, the more likely it is that the companies will listen. Wendell also has a great answer that I wanted to read out. It says, the company likes to divide us. What better way to do that than to create doubt? That's what this is. Kathleen also has a great comment in the chat, says the longer the line, the shorter the strike. It's classic because it's true. A line that stretches across multiple states is pretty darn long.